Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT and SAT and CLT now podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT course that includes everything you need to ace your ACT test. A full textbook, tons of ACT questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now let's get started. Today we've got Ed Antoine from Antoine Education. And Ed, I'd love if you can introduce yourself and your company.
Okay, hi, my name's Ed Antoine, and my company's Antoine Education. We're based in Brooklyn, New York, and I've been an SAT tutor for many years. I started as an undergraduate at Princeton University, and started as a full-time test prep professional about 20 years ago. I now provide SAT tutoring, SAT and ACT tutoring, as well as a course for high school admissions for students trying to get into some very selective public high schools in New York City.
Very cool. Yeah, and so, you've been doing this for 20 years, but I assume that it's not just because you're old school or anything that you say this, but one of the things that I thought was interesting is you said that even for the digital SAT, the best way to start preparing is by doing it on paper. So I'd love if you could kind of, why do you say that? Why do you tell people to do that?
Well, I do it for two reasons. One, because partially because of experience. Starting to work with kids on the digital test. It became apparent to me pretty quickly that we're pretty much working on the same skills, same knowledge base, same skills as we were on the paper test. So I had kind of protocols in place for helping kids prepare to get ready for the material on the paper test. And after looking at the digital test, I realized, well, it's pretty much the same thing. So the same protocols for the most part should work. But again, of course, I thought, okay, new digital test, new format. But the kids are just so comfortable with the digital format. It's really almost a non-issue for them. And so I didn't feel like there was nothing really to prepare them for in terms of the digital, or very little. Shouldn't say nothing, but very little to prepare them for to get ready for the digital environment. And what I came to feel is that it just becomes a distraction. I want them completely focused on the content and learning the material that they need to know, and as are more challenging, the approach that I want them to take, like how I want them to think about the questions. That's my 90% of my focus, how I want them to think about the question. And, staring at a screen on a digital app takes away attention, I feel, from, getting that message across.
Yeah, and could you elaborate more, I think, on just, you're talking about like you want people to pay attention. What are the aspects of doing these questions that you feel like need attention, particularly when you're going through and like prepping for the first time?
Well, I'm going to throw in the fact that I also do most of my tutoring in person. And I think that maybe also affects a little bit the degree to which, my approach. But part of it, and is just they've got to adopt like certain attitudes or procedures. I once heard someone describe, high-end test prep as like, it's like behavior modification. So you want the kids. I have kids come in and I tell them, well, if you keep doing things the way you've always done them, you're going to keep getting the score you always got. And sure, you can learn new things and you're going to get a slightly incrementally better score. But your biggest score improvement is going to come when you start kind of looking at the test a little bit differently, looking at the questions differently. And you asked for a specific example. A specific example would be, say, I have a very structured approach to evaluating answers in a reading question. And I tell them, I can tell you this in about 5 minutes. And it may take you weeks or months to start doing it in the way that's necessary to get all the questions right. So I anticipate we're going to be revisiting this. And putting it on a digital format doesn't help me or them at all adopt this new framework of saying, I'll say, what are the reasons why an answer choice are wrong? on a reading question.
Mhm.
Now, and then they'll start and they'll say, and tell them in the order that I taught them to you. Like, not just like, I love the fact that you know one of the reasons, but I also want you to know them in the order. And the funny thing is, they're kind of like, okay, you're being a little whatever annoying about this. But then I explained to them, this is why I want, this is why you need to know them in the right order, because you're evaluating different aspects of the choice. And there is a
Mhm.
hierarchical structure of how you should be evaluating things. Now, there's nothing about, being on a computer or using a digital format that helps them understand that framework better. And if
Mhm.
anything, there's something that could distract. Because honestly, when I'm trying to like make a point like that, I want them looking at me, not their paper,
Right.
not the screen. It's like, are you getting this or not? Are you buying it? Sometimes they sound, I'm trying to close the deal. Are you buying this?
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what is it about, being on a screen that makes it so hard for people to like walk through the different steps, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of what I'm picking up reading between the lines here.
I feel like the screen is like it's like a layer between you and them, or anything that gets between you and them in terms of connecting and committing. Sometimes it's just connecting and committing to doing things a different way, or understanding the approach that I'm trying to explain can just cause just that's in the regular case. There's something between you. With a kid who's like the kind of mediocre to like less than mediocre student, it's not just in the
Mhm.
way, it's like their screen. It's like they use it to keep their distance. Like,
Mm.
they don't want to get too close. They don't really want to change how they're doing, and in some cases, they really couldn't care whether their score improves. Um, and so you have to,
Right.
I have to kind of pull them in and say, "Come on, let's engage in this. Let's. There's something in this for you too." You know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I kind of, you mentioned that like, why people buy tutoring, right, is for like the personality and the coaching. But I would also say it's like almost like I think of it like akin to like a personal trainer, where at least for me, like if I ever get a personal trainer, you should know that the main reason I'm doing it is it'll force me to work out, not because I need a specific person to tell me what workouts to do, right? It's just I need somebody who sits there and is like, it's Friday at 4 o'clock, like it's time.
No, I totally agree. I mean, my wife uses an app to work out because she doesn't need someone to tell her to work out. She does yoga on via an app. I personally would turn the
Oh,
app
very
off
cool.
probably.
Right.
You know, if I were
Yeah,
doing it,
so that's right. Yeah, and I guess that's kind of the even like a little bit of the kind of direction of this episode a little bit. I'm curious, kind of just like the digital SAT now is standard for everybody, but I think that like prepping online has its advantages and disadvantages, right? I mean, we have an ACT prep course, we'll have an SAT one soon, but at the same time, right, like if you're doing like tutoring and things like that and working on specific areas, I think there's a lot of value in like kind of turning off all the electronics and thinking about it.
and I agree with that, and I agree with there's a lot that a student can gain from doing things online, either you know real time or asynchronous. But I
Hmm.
think that with what I do and the clientele that I get, you're not always getting great students. Like a super
Hmm.
student can do. And I'll even say this to some parents sometimes if I know the student a little bit. Like, a lot of things will work for a really good student. Um,
Hmm.
if the student is not like stellar, they're either mediocre or even reluctant, then you've got to do more. It falls more on the tutor. Just like a coach and a team. You don't have the best players. You've got to find a way to get them to win, whether it's a different formation or it's a different level of motivation or fitness. Um, and I'll throw in one other kind of related thing that I've been doing much more of, I would say, recently, is study skill. And again, that to me that kind of falls into the realm of why it helps to do it on paper. And I don't do it all on paper. I should mention that. What I do is I'll start off, if I'm going to do typical 2 to 3 months of prep for an SAT student. It's the first month that's
Hmm.
on paper. It's the first month when I'm really trying to make an impression about like what's important, what you need
Right.
to focus on. Once we go through that first month and they're kind of on board and they've learned a bunch of stuff, then we're going to do the rest of our practice in digital format. Um, but during that initial phase, a lot of the focus might be I'm trying to find, on their study skills. Are they good at learning new material? Do they have a
Right.
structured way of learning things? And if they don't, and we need to talk about that, again, it's probably gonna be about the notes they take during the session, looking at them, evaluating them, editing them, and then it's gonna be when they come back the next week. Did you look at your notes? Did you learn from your notes? Do you remember what we talked about last? And again, the better students, you don't even have to do that. They just come back. They did another test section or something, and they got questions right this time that they got wrong last time, and it's because they learned the material. Um, for other kids, they didn't get it right the second time, and
Hmm.
I mean, this is a conversation I have with kids all the time, which is like, I know they got it wrong for the second time, and I say, do you remember talking about this? That's 50-50, yes or no. I'm pretty sure we talked about this. Could you flick back in your notes and look for it? And they
Hmm.
don't want to do that because they don't want to. They don't want to look at their notes at all, let alone in the middle of the tutoring session, flip back through their notes, find the note. And of course, the worst part is that they get to the note and I say, okay, could you just read your notes and then try to answer this question again? which I think is like pedagogically sound. I think it helps them. I think it makes the point that like, you know what, your notes have value. Um,
Yeah.
and you are a learner. You can actually write something down, review it, and apply it. And I really feel like
Hmm.
that I could say that to them, but it doesn't have the impact of them actually doing it for themselves. And I want them to experience that. Like, okay, I'm studying, I'm learning, and I'm improving my performance on the test.
Right. Yeah. And also I think that it's like the key thing that I'm kind of taking away from this is that like there's really the like acquisition phase of learning, right? Like I'm picking up a new method or approach or skill, and then there's like the practice phase, right? So during the acquisition phase, it's helpful to kind of take it slow, take notes, like be thoughtful about it, and then you can put it into practice. You have to actually read your notes to do that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a really good way to put it. The acquisition phase. That's what I want to make sure. I want to make sure that we don't. And I guess in a way, I just kind of noticed it. When you just start with the digital test and everything shifts to the performance stage, like, am I performing at the level? Am I getting the score I want? Whereas I want to
Right.
slow it down and I want to say, look, we're going to take our time and we're going to be thoughtful and you're going to acquire some more knowledge. You're going to acquire the knowledge base you need to do well on this test.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other way of thinking about it is like they essentially like need to kind of start with thinking about the content. I think like because this is something that like we've even seen, for instance, in other tests that we serve, where like there will be students that like share the correct answers on like practice questions or practice tests. And it's like, these are for practice. Why are you guys like cheating, right? To like improve your practice scores, right? And the reason why they're doing it is because, they are have that sort of performance like anxiety a little bit, and they're like, oh, like the teacher's going to get on me if I got 5 out of 10 of these wrong, so I need to like, cheat to get them right, so that it's like that's like the not the lesson you should be taking away from this at all. Like the you should be focused on learning how to do it and not be worried about the results at first.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that is a delicate process of getting them to kind of like, you know, refocus on just this whole learning new things, hopefully experience some positive, like making that positive. Like, you came in for your score, it's about performance. You may have a lot of anxiety about your performance, like you may have expectations from yourself, your family, your school, but to kind of dial it back a little bit and just say, no, we're just going to talk about this topic a little bit, and maybe see that there is actually maybe a little inherent interest, or we can just spend a little time talking about
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's just also, the I hate to say this should be fun, but like at a minimum, it should be at least interesting to try and figure out how to solve these problems, right?
it. Yeah, yeah. No, that's the thing. Yeah, it should be. I in a way, I don't feel like I can make them think it's interesting, but there's always this invitation, like, oh, do you see the interesting, side of this? I'll tell you though, I had an interesting story about this whole issue of cheating. Now, one thing I personally have never, I don't know, I think I'm a little bit unsympathetic to the cheaters in the sense of like, look, you're a volunteer, or at least usually. No, I've been doing this a lot. I've been doing this many years,
Right.
and when I first started doing this, like now, almost everyone does SAT prep or ACT prep. And when I started
Hmm.
doing it, when I was a sophomore in college, the last century, um, it was not everybody doing SAT prep. It really was just a few kids who really wanted higher score. And they were asking their parents to put them into SAT prep. And their parents were like, why? We never did SAT prep.
Right.
So you really were like, it was like nice. It was all volunteers. Nobody was being forced
People
into
who
it.
really cared, yeah.
Yeah. And there was no, and to the degree that like someone didn't want to do it, it was just like, okay, fine. You don't want to do it. Um, you know, sit in the back of the room, don't disturb the class. I won't give you any trouble. You know, um, but now I feel like the expectation is a little different. The parents really they want a motivator. They want someone who's going to get their kid engaged in it. They feel like they really need an improved score. Um, but obviously, it can have some negative. I had a student a couple of years ago who was just very worried about getting through the reading on the old paper-based exam, and he was like, he told me, luckily we had a good relationship. He said, I'm just going to cheat. He goes, I'm not going to be able to finish the reading, so I'm going to, I'm going to go back to that section because I'll be able to finish the math quickly, and I'm going to go back and finish up the reading. And I said, you can't do that. He goes, oh yeah, I can. I'm sure I can. I know other people who've done it. I won't get caught. And I said, well, that's fine, but you're not doing it during my practice test. And I said,
Right.
when you do our proctored exam, I'm going to take your reading answer sheet from you after you finish the first section because you're not cheating like that. And
Well, not to mention, like, isn't that what they're supposed to do?
what's that?
Isn't that what they are supposed to do?
What do you mean?
Like the proctor in the real test.
Well, they don't take your answer sheet from you. I mean,
Oh, okay.
no, they you keep your answer sheet. And again, we're talking the old SAT. You keep and the current ACT. You have your full answer sheet during the whole test, and they don't take your booklet from you. They're supposed to be watching you, but his whatever experience or what he heard was you could get away with it. And to me, from a test, I was like, that's a bad strategy. Forget about whether you can get away with it. That's a really bad strategy, you know, for a test. A good
Mhm.
strategy is I find a way to finish on time. That's a good strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm relying on cheating is not a good way to go.
Very, yeah.
And I mean that's also like I am curious. One thing I wanted to ask about with regards to like the paper-based prep for digital SAT, how do you handle math? Do you let them use like a calculator on the side, or are you trying to have them do math like by hand at first?
No, I let them use a calculator. That's a great. It's really good. perspective, and I struggle with it a little bit because there's certain things that were crucial that you were able to do kind of analytically
Right.
that I've dropped. I've reluctantly dropped because it's so clear that like Desmos will do this for you. Certain
Yeah.
things like for solving, say, simultaneous equations. A lot of tricks, a lot of shortcuts, a lot of things that I taught for years. I just, I don't bother with it anymore unless they show any particular interest. In this case, it's if they show an interest, not me telling them, "Oh, this is interesting." I don't put it as an aside. It's just the things that Desmos will do for them. I don't insist that they learn how to do it, in their head or
Right.
on paper.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's also so much of learning about these tests is like learning how to approach problems and like diagnose problems. So you can basically just stick to focusing on that at the beginning anyway. And then, it's like, oh, well, this is one that you do with Desmos. Sure.
Yes,
Right. And then
yes.
that kind of thing.
It doesn't, and again, yeah, like you said, it doesn't take away from the whole idea of like being able to diagnose what needs to happen. And if your diagnosis says throw it into Desmos, then you throw it into Desmos. But there are definitely questions where I've had students say, "Oh, I should use Desmos," and I've said, "No, you should already know the answer, and this is how you should already know the answer. You should have assessed the situation."
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, great. Any other kind of thoughts on this topic as we wrap up here?
Um, Nothing really new. Just I just really feel strongly about this whole idea of like keeping them focused on the knowledge, and then also keeping them focused on their ability to acquire new knowledge, improving their ability to acquire
Hmm.
new knowledge.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Ed Antoine from Antoine Education. You can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT course by going to achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off.